Hello, and welcome to AI news that you should know about. I'm your host, Ashley Coffey.
And I'm Daniel Hill. Every week in about 15 minutes, we cover the AI news stories that you need to know about. This week, we'll be talking about OpenAI and Microsoft saying they've signed a non binding memorandum of understanding for the next phase of their partnership, and they're working on finalizing those terms. We'll also talk about how the $1.5 billion Anthropic settlement has been skewered by the judge, and this settlement has to do with authors in pirated books over AI training. We'll also talk about a new startup's plan to make podcasts for $1 per episode and a California bill that would regulate AI companion chatbots close to becoming a law.
We'll be covering all of that on our show today, but first, here's a quick word from our sponsors. Welcome back. Let's dive into today's stories. Our top story this week is OpenAI and Microsoft say that they have signed a non binding memorandum of understanding for the next phase of their partnership and are working to finalize the terms. This is a big deal. Why does it matter? So, OpenAI's meteoric rise as the tech industry's AI gold standard bearer has always been shadowed by the company's complex, unorthodox structure. And what it means by that is the non conventional nonprofit structure and how it's trying to transition to have a for profit arm. Very interesting stuff here. But apparently, according to this revised partnership deal, this clears a path for ChatGPT to restructure itself. So they're inching closer towards that profit arm, which this is a really good thing for people to pay attention to because it will be a really good use case of the examples of how the tentacles of ChatGPT are setting itself up for like fast profit. That's always been the case, but there are things that we do need to consider here before we go all in on for profit, and that's like AI legislation regulation, which according to this and what we know now in the US, it very much a clear path for the benefit of ChatGPT, OpenAI. So we'll see where this goes, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, Daniel.
So, first, I think this is a good reminder on what the structure of OpenAI is, because as I understand it, there's a nonprofit part and a for profit part. Are those both under the same umbrella of a company? Do you recall?
To my knowledge, yes. Yes. And that's what makes it complex. It's not a conventional structure like most people are used to. So, but of course, this is the first type of company of its kind to do something like this. So I think they're treading carefully, but also trying to put themselves in a position to not be regulated, but also make profit, which I don't, you
Right.
can't have one and not the other. But I guess everyone's trying to have their cake and eat it too these days.
Yes. The article that you linked to said that Microsoft's goal was to get continued access to OpenAI's technology and products, which says to me they're not building enough of their own internal AI products, or they don't think their AI products are as successful as what OpenAI is doing. Therefore, they want to keep that access going through an agreement like this. And OpenAI was looking for the freedom to move forward with restructuring and look beyond Microsoft for cloud providers, which says, and I'm going to guess here, to me that probably they also want to partner with AWS for cloud servers or Google for cloud services, which is something we've talked about on the show before. So they're not looking to be locked into Microsoft, but yet Microsoft wants to lock them down to have access to their technology, which is really interesting. And then this article also that you include that you linked to included a part that said Elon Musk has also sued to stop the restructuring, which says to me there's some kind of panic there that he's concerned that this partnership is going to be light years better than anything he and the Grok team can do in the foreseeable future. Therefore, they must be stopped, which is streams to me panic a little bit, a little desperation. What do you think?
I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. Definitely panic and desperation from someone that doesn't want things to go against his competitor. You wanted, so I wanted to like pull the thread on what you said about Microsoft not wanting to continue to build on their own. That is what I'm seeing in the market with my clients is that Copilot exists, but it's terrible. The only benefit to Copilot is that it's integrated within like SharePoint. It's basically baked in. You can access most of your files, but it's just not, you know, to a point where it's as sophisticated as ChatGPT. So people are just using ChatGPT instead of Copilot. So I think what Microsoft is trying to do is leverage the success of ChatGPT within their products. And but the thing is, like, if we've seen any kind of repetitive behavior from Microsoft, is that they take something really great and make it really bad.
Skype?
Let's look at
Are you talking
Skype.
about Skype? Yeah, great example.
Yes,
LinkedIn is
yes,
also an example too. I will say that, in my opinion, LinkedIn is
exactly.
not great.
Exactly. So we need to tread carefully here. But I think OpenAI has the choice to, figure out what they want to do next. We'll see with how this goes. All right, this next one, a really big one here because this was the top headline, I think, at the beginning of the week. And then by the middle of the week, the headline changed. This is a good example that not all things are final. So Judge Skewer's $1.5 billion Anthropic settlement with authors and pirated books case over AI training. So this is directly from the Associated Press. And what happened, just so for everyone knows on the timeline, on Monday, the judge skewered this $1.5 billion settlement. And the reason for that is after spending nearly an hour, the U.S. District Judge William Alsup scheduled another hearing in San Francisco on September 25th to review whether his concerns have been addressed. And the concerns are quote unquote troubling. And they're really wanting to make sure that the publishing side doesn't create something that is going to be forced down authors' throats. So the judge feels like he was misled in this, which is why they want to go back and review all the information. The judge said, quote, demonstrated a lack of understanding of how the publishing industry works. And that was from the CEO of the Association of the American Publishers who attended the hearing. So the judge's misgivings emerged just a few days after Anthropic and attorneys who filed a class action lawsuit announced the settlement that was designed to resolve the pirating claims and avert a trial that was scheduled to begin in December. And long story short, this proposed settlement would pay authors and publishers about $3,000 for each of the books covered in the settlement. And one of the attorneys for the authors told the judge that about 465,000 books are on the list of works pirated by Anthropic. And the judge said he needed more ironclad assurances that the number won't swell to ensure the company doesn't get blindsided by more lawsuits coming out of the woodwork. So I totally get that. What are your thoughts, Daniel?
So I think this one is very confusing because the judge had said that training the AI chatbots on copyrighted books wasn't illegal. But what Anthropic did was acquire millions of books by using pirated websites. And that's what they used to train their Claude model. And the issue isn't that they put books in, the issue is how they got those books. So if they had bought them all legitimately from Amazon.com as a user, for instance, that probably, I guess, would have been fine, but it was because they used pirated websites in order to get those books. So if you're a company and whether you're a startup, there's investment costs. And if you're going to train a large language model on data, you're going to have to buy that data rightfully. And if that's what the ruling ends up being, and that's why Anthropic has to pay out a settlement because they didn't buy those books originally, that 100% makes sense. You make investment costs in a business, whether it's office space or server space or humans as people. All of these things have costs when you start a business. And so that makes sense. I'm interested to see where this one ends up.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Everything is going so quickly; it's hard to keep up. And another example of like what happens in the courts is going minuscule of the speed as technology is happening all the time. But yeah, we'll see what happens with this.
Excellent. We are going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking about a new podcast company that's an AI startup and plans to produce podcasts for $1 per episode, and a new California bill that will regulate AI companion chatbots. Stick around. Welcome back. Let's continue with our stories. The next one is about an AI startup that plans to produce podcasts for $1 per episode. They think they can produce 3,000 podcast episodes per week. A little bit about this company. It's called Inception Point AI, and the CEO was previously the chief operating officer for the podcasting company Wondery. So this is someone who has industry knowledge and insight. The plan that the company is looking to do is to be able to produce each episode for around $1, depending on how long and complex it is, and insert advertising with that episode. So if 20 people listen to that episode, the company will make enough in ad revenue to make a profit without factoring in, obviously overhead and all the other things. So why would they do this? They're just looking at how can we make money as quickly as possible. But this is where the term AI slop comes in. Is this really going to be something that people want to listen to? The contrast here, or the point that this article makes, which we'll link to, is some people use the term Luddite. And the CEO of this company said, people who are still referring to all AI generated content as AI slop are probably lazy Luddites because there's a lot of good stuff out there. End quote. And this is new for me. I learned what the term Luddite actually means. Like a lot of times we use it to describe someone who seems like they're afraid of new technology or they don't want to actually invest in learning a new technology, but that's not what a Luddite is. This comes from a historical term, and it described people who were protesting that their wages were falling at the same time that the factories that they worked in, the people who owned those factories were making increasing profits, food prices were increasing, and so they weren't anti-technology, they wanted economic justice. If there's profits and costs are going up for individuals, that profit should be shared accordingly. But now we use the term Luddite as an insult. So when this CEO was saying, oh, if you don't like this AI generated podcast, you're a Luddite, that's not really a good description of it. I want to just get, Ashley, your thoughts. What do you think about AI generated podcasts in this scenario?
Well, first on the Luddite thing, I'm glad that you brought that up because I've heard people mention it before in tech circles. I did not know where it originated from. That is fascinating. I've always wondered because it was like it's such an interesting term to use for that. So I'm glad that you demystified that. I wonder at what point in history did it like switch over to an insult. But so one thing here I want to mention is what the heck is going on with Wondery? Because okay, CEO left, but also Wondery just had a lot of kind of mix up in leadership.
Yeah.
And also, Wondery is the network in which Travis Kelce and his brother's podcast, New Heights, was
Oh,
launched on. So, like, there's a lot of really important things happening at the same time here that I think point to some clues of where things are going. I think, yeah, the CEO of Wondery that left for this company, of course, has industry insight. I just don't like the idea of devaluing content and making it seem as cheap as possible because you and I both know we've been doing this for years. It takes so much time to create quality content, and trying to put a $1 on it is almost like disgraceful to me because we've spent so much time creating stuff. And that's not to say that you can create great content with AI, but you have to have a human in the loop. And with this model, it's going to put so much more noise out there and make it harder to hear the signal. And it's already happening with the saturation of podcasters in the market. You and I have both seen it. So it makes it harder to elevate, which is why when I talk to people, I'm like, yeah, my first podcast, I'm doing it for 5 years. It's not like it just popped up yesterday. Like everyone likes to say, oh, I have a podcast now, which is great. Good for you. Keep going. It's hard. We'll see you on the other side if you make it. But yeah, I think, was it 90% of podcasts don't make it past, I think, 100 episodes? I haven't looked at that stat in a while, but what are your thoughts on this one?
it's definitely something where I think there are times where some AI in a podcast would probably be okay. If we had a third co-host who was an AI person, I'm open to that idea. But me personally, unless the podcast quality of that AI is very good and very listenable, I'm not going to choose an AI generated podcast over a human podcast. I would pick the human every time. But I do think there is a difference between a podcast where it's two people sort of speaking off the cuff, going back and forth, hearing ums and ahs, versus hearing people who cut out every cut out every like, every and an AI generated podcast isn't going to have any of those things. So if you like that clear, crisp audio experience, no stammering, the person just got their idea out clearly every single time, you might prefer an AI podcast. So I could see some scenarios where people might potentially be interested, not me personally necessarily, but I could see that being an attractive way to listen to content.
Totally, totally. And it's interesting because like the tool that we're using, we have the tools to do that, to like remove the ums and ahs and the blank space and all of that. But it's about quality. I think we're just looking at that pinnacle of quality over quantity. So I
Yes.
encourage everyone to consume responsibly.
Let's go on to our last story. The California State Assembly took a big step toward regulating AI by passing a bill that will regulate AI companion chatbots in order to protect minors and vulnerable users. Good news, this legislation passed with bipartisan support and is now headed to the California State Senate for a final vote. If Governor Gavin Newsom signs this bill into law, it would take effect January 1st, 2026, making California the first state to require AI chatbot operators to implement safety protocols for AI companions and hold companies legally accountable if their chatbots fail to meet those standards. This bill would also require platforms to provide recurring alerts to users and as much as every 3 hours for minors, reminding them they're speaking to an AI chatbot, not a real person, and that they should take a break. That is so important. The last part I want to mention is that this bill would also allow individuals who believe they have been injured by violations from these chatbots to file lawsuits against AI companies seeking injunctive relief and damages up to $1,000 per violation and attorney's fees. And I think that last part is huge because if I feel that something is wrong with a Meta chatbot and I want to sue Meta, they have a million lawyers with way deeper pockets than I ever could. But this would potentially level the playing field for that kind of scenario, even covering attorney's fees in order to make sure that the law is upheld. Ashley, what do you think?
Wow, I'm glad you pulled this. There's so many things. So I'll start with just the last part that you mentioned here about the $1,000 per violation and attorney's fees. This is structured. So I'm going to do devil's advocate here. This is for me. I feel like this is structured for volume and for access.
Good
The
points.
average person
Yes.
isn't going to have the capital to pay for attorney's fees. But the $1,000 per violation is surprisingly low when I think of, for example, the two parents who have lost 14-year-old and a 16-year-old to died by suicide after having, chatbot conversations with character.ai and another one, like, I mean, that's kind of a slap in the face to be like, you're going to give me $1,000 and my son is dead. So I feel like there's something that needs to change here on that front. For It needs to be more clear about injuries and violations and defining what that means and defining if death is included in that. That needs to be clearly defined. Um, and so that's something that I'm worried about is like if it keeps it to 1,000, that's good for the tech companies, but good for also people trying to bring things forward because the attorney's fees. What I'm curious about though is the every 3 hour alert for minors. They just need to do that for everyone, adults included.
Yes.
Um, I don't think we're at a place in society yet to fully comprehend and understand and be reminded that AI can make mistakes. Always check for accuracy. Like, I want to put that embroidered on a t-shirt to remind people about it, not just minors. So I think this is a good step in the right direction. Sad that it took this long for it to happen, but another example is that this technology is moving so much faster than policy and legislation does. But this is a good step. Hopefully, other states can use portions of this to create a framework that works in their state to protect minors.
And I'm glad you brought up about the $1,000 per violation because you're right. That is planned to increase volume of potential lawsuits, not waiting until something major happens like a death and then try to get a big one, right? It's about a lot of small paper cuts as opposed to one giant. Probably shouldn't use that illustration. That's it for our AI news that you should know about this week. And now a new fun section that we're trying. What's the best thing you used AI for this week?
Yes. Okay. So I've been using Perplexity's comment browser because it has the agent feature in there. And I've been applying for a lot of like small business grants and some media badges in different places. And typically, when I fill out those applications, I'm putting the same information in over and over and over. So I have websites, and one of my websites is my own website, ashleycoffee.com. I keep most of my information there. Some of it is like publicly available, but I do have stuff that's like on the back end that I remember the URL for. So I use Perplexity's comment browser to fill out my forms, and I use my personal website as a reference. So I say, fill out the information in this form using my website as a reference, and I'll, add anything else to it. But while I leave that to do its thing, I can go work on something else. So it's saving me, I don't know, 3 minutes here, 2 minutes here, which adds up throughout the day. I just cannot say enough great things about Comet, Perplexity's browser. I wish GPT or OpenAI had something similar. I know that they're working on it, and they do have some agentic capabilities, but nowhere near on the Comet level, in my opinion. What about you,
That's
Daniel?
that's fascinating. I saw someone say that ChatGPT doesn't know how to alphabetize words properly, and so I wanted to do a little test. I don't always trust what people say on the internet, so I asked ChatGPT, give me a list of 100 random words. Once I got the list, I said, okay, please alphabetize them. And it did not alphabetize the words in order. It got about 90% of them right, but some it did not. And so I said, hey, these words are not alphabetized. Please check again. And it said, oh, you're right. And then it took another 3.5 minutes to fully alphabetize that list of 100 words, which again, it was 90% right to start with. So it was strange that it took so long for me. But like you had mentioned just a minute ago, AI isn't always right. AI isn't infallible. It does make mistakes. And so it just kind of reminded me of let's not pretend it's the greatest, end all be all, because mistakes still get made. Mistakes are what make us human. So I'm not sure that's a commentary for another time, but just a reminder, double check what the AI is doing.
Always, 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 always. And tell your friends, tell your grandparents, especially, because the rise in scams using voice replicators to replicate, my granddaughter called me in a panic. She got in a car accident, said she needed $1,000. Like people can really recreate these like urgent situations. So just always trust but verify. That's my advice here.
You can find that is it for our show today. You can find links to everything we've discussed in the show notes, and you can connect with us on social media. We'd love to hear what you think of the show and how we can make it better. You can find me on Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at Daniel Hill Media.
And thank you for listening to today's episode of AI News That You Should Know About. If you really liked today's episode, go give us a rate or review wherever you listen to your podcast. Maybe that's Spotify, maybe that's Apple Podcasts. It takes a little bit of a time to do it, but it means so much and it helps other listeners find our valuable content. And if you want more tech talk, you can find me on my other podcast at Coffee and Code. You can also find me on Instagram at Ashley R Coffee 89. That's ASHLEYRCOFFEY 89. And if you're interested in taking AI to the next level, I'm curious to talk to you. I have a business that specializes in guiding people through these transformations. And I'd love to hear how you are interested in implementing AI in your business. So reach out to me. Let me know what you think.
Thank you for listening, and come back next week for more AI news that you should know about.